When I worked for President Obama, he had this saying, if Thomas Edison came back, he would recognize the grid because nothing has changed. If you think about environmental protection in this country, it's largely been about sticks. What the Biden administration has done is carrots.
Well, the world needs to be doing well, and climate equity is one of the key pillars in terms of the type of impact and the type of markets we're trying to build.
We're getting there with electric vehicles. We still have a charging infrastructure need. We need to put them together in a manageable way and get over this hump of consumer concern.
Security, safety, and sustainability. And if we are collectively looking across these three elements together, then I think we wash away a lot of the stuff that might confuse us and let us get to work.
Welcome, everyone, to Political Capital episode number 7, Catalyzing Net Zero. My name is Nate Lowenthal. I'm the founder and managing partner of Commonweal Ventures and the host of Political Capital, which is a conversation series exploring the intersection of technology, policy, and finance. Thank you to everyone who's tuning in from home or the office. We should have some time for Q&A towards the end, so feel free to submit questions as we go using Zoom. Thank you, Carol, Brandon, and Meredith for being with us today. I'm honored. The three of you are really leading the effort in the U.S. in the fight against global climate change, and really pleased to have this conversation today. I'm going to introduce you quickly, and then we'll get into the conversation. Carol served as administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency under Bill Clinton for 2 terms, making her the longest-serving EPA administrator in U.S. history. She subsequently served as assistant to the president and director of the White House Office of Energy and Climate Change Policy under President Obama. She is now senior of counsel at Covington and Burling law firm and an operating partner with Commonweal Ventures. Brandon Middaugh is a leader nationally in helping corporations find their path to net zero. She's director of the $1 billion Climate Innovation Fund at Microsoft. She's previously held senior roles both at Microsoft and at Sun Edison. She has a BA and a master's in environmental science from Yale, my alma mater, and an MBA from Stanford. The Honorable Meredith Berger is Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Energy, Installations, and the Environment and serves as the Chief Sustainability Officer for the Navy. She previously held senior roles both at Microsoft and at the Navy and at EPA. She has a BA from Vanderbilt, a JD from Nova Southeastern University, and an MPA from Harvard Kennedy School. Again, thank you all so much for joining me this afternoon. Just to frame up the conversation, I was talking last week to the head of sustainability at another Fortune 500 company that will go unnamed, and he's sort of a colorful gentleman. And I asked him how it was going implementing his path to net zero, against his plan. And he quoted the famous Mike Tyson line. I know you know this where this is going. Everyone has a plan to get punched in the face. And I think what he was getting at is that it's one thing to have a plan for reaching net zero. It's another thing to do it. And we were in a phase of big commitments by the public and private sector over the last few years. And now we're really in the heart of it, of getting the work done. And that's what I really want to ventilate in this conversation. How is that process going? What impacts are those commitments and actions having on clean energy markets nationally? And where does the sort of climate movement and clean energy markets head from here? So Meredith, let's start with you. The Navy is obviously a huge institution, 80 bases around the world, 350,000 or so active duty, enlisted sailors and officers. How have you gone about approaching sustainability in the Navy, and what have been some of your priorities so far?
First things first, we established a chief sustainability officer, nothing like focus and reach to be able to achieve an objective. And so a new role within the Department of the Navy. And so that was at first, giving people that direction, that North Star inside of the military. It is guidance, it is hierarchy, and it is direction. And so making sure that was a priority that the Department of the Navy had established, scoped, and was driving forward. And so within the organization, making sure that we were putting out some of the places that we could have the biggest impact. So we are a big contributor to some of the places that we see that are most consequential. So think fuel consumption, greenhouse gas emissions, footprints in terms of infrastructure. And so when you have a big impact, you are a big market driver. And so we are looking for ways to send the demand signal out so that we can, as much as we are contributing to the problem, we can contribute to the solution by putting out requirements, needs, and ways through technology, through practice, and through the way that we are structuring our investments and our actions to draw down on some of those places. So those are some of the places that I've established a priority, set the North Star, make it the ethos of the department, and determine how we can see a return on our investments and our actions to achieve the end state.
That's great. I want to get a little deeper in a couple of minutes into both the technology and the kind of ROI that you're seeing. And thank you so much for your leadership and commitment. Brandon, I want to bring you in. Microsoft has set very ambitious targets on carbon emissions and very laudable goals, not just to be carbon negative by 2030, but to actually extract from the atmosphere by 2050 all of the carbon emissions that you produced historically, going back to the company's founding in 1975, which is no small task. We'd love to hear a little bit about your work in that effort, in particular about the $1 billion Climate Innovation Fund, and maybe a little bit about the relative focus of that fund between technologies that are relevant for Microsoft in particular versus, relevant for climate change as a whole.
Great, thank you. And thanks for gathering us here for this session today. So in my work, we are investing capital, Microsoft's capital, in the emerging climate solutions and technologies that we and the rest of the industry and the rest of society need to reach these climate transition goals. And so we launched our Climate Innovation Fund, which is a $1 billion balance sheet backed initiative, in 2020 as part of our efforts to become carbon negative. And it was really a recognition that there are some things that are directly within our control and some things that are dependent on technologies and markets that didn't exist then and really still need to scale up quite significantly in order to deliver those technologies and solutions at the scale that a net zero corporate can purchase and procure. So that was the spirit in which we launched the fund. It is paired with a carbon fee internally that is managed across the business, and that is essentially an internal price on carbon. And it varies in terms of what the source is and how hard it will be to go abate that carbon. But those are two of the tools that we've been able to use on different time horizons to really spur both the signal internally for decisions that affect our progress towards our goals, as well as sending that demand signal and capital investment signal into the markets outside of Microsoft. I think the complexity of these value chains, whether it's the Navy or Microsoft or another corporation, it really requires you to go beyond what's in your sort of direct sphere of individual decision-making and shape the actions of others and build those markets proactively.
I'm glad you brought the carbon price internally. I mean, you've seen some other companies now kind of follow Microsoft's lead on that front. Could you say just one more minute about how that actually works operationally within the company?
Yes, operationally, each year, the corporate finance team evaluates and sets an internal price for scope 1 and 2 emissions and a different price for scope 3 emissions. Those are value chain emissions, upstream and downstream. And that is meant to internalize the cost to go abate those carbon emissions. And the fee is what funds our ability to go by carbon removal, which is the other side of the ledger. So our goal is to reduce primarily, first and foremost, our own emissions and those of our suppliers and our value chain. But then what remains after those reductions are in place, we need to go remove, and there's a certain market price for that.
Carol, you've seen shifts in environmental policy and action over a couple of decades at this point. How do you think about the current wave of the last call it 5 years of corporate commitments around climate change? How do they compare historically to what corporations have done, and how have you seen the kind of baton of leadership be handed between the public and private sector?
Well, thank you, first of all, and it's such an honor to be here with Brandon and Meredith, both women who are really doing such important work in the climate space and providing such important leadership. I think the biggest change is the most recent change, which is the commitment of the Biden administration to pump in, $400+ billion. And if you think about environmental protection in this country, it's largely been about sticks. We look at the science, we look at the law, we set a pollution standard, and it served us well. I mean, our air is definitely cleaner, our water is safer, but it's an ongoing journey, and it is setting the standards, and then equally important, enforcing the standards. What the Biden administration has done is carrots. We're just going to use every single financial tool available to us, whether it's tax credits, whether it's loans, it's guarantees, it's grants, whatever, to see if we can really stimulate the next generation and really, legitimize and secure the next generation of technology solutions. And, I think it's fair to say we are involved in an industrial revolution here in the United States today, and on a scale, compared to maybe the last industrial revolution, which we're sort of seeking to correct the fallout from. I think that when you look at the private sector and the role they need to play, the carrots are about incentivizing them and bringing them to the table. We cannot do this without them at the table. I think many of us were in Dubai for the most recent conference of the parties. And the thing that, and I've been to many, I've had the privilege to go with presidents to several. The thing that struck me was the financial institutions had shown up. So not just the businesses with the solutions, but the people who put the money in the game. And I found that incredibly encouraging. I was also struck by the fact that normally I go to these things. I've been doing this, as you point out, for a very long time. I know a lot of people. I didn't know many people because it's another generation, which is good. I shouldn't know many people. So that was good. But I do think we are seeing a private sector commitment. Nate, you said in the opening about how we saw a lot of people sort of commit to net zero and things like that. And now the hard work is beginning. And I think that's true. The commitments were the first step, and they're important. And I think, the work that Brandon's doing under Microsoft's commitment is probably cutting edge compared to a lot of people. But the actual delivery is a journey. It's not like you check it off your to-do list. Okay, great. We got there. We're done. It will be a forever. And I think that is settling in on the private sector today, that this is a forever responsibility, and it is not an insignificant one.
On that, Meredith, maybe talk for a minute about how you, as a practical matter, have been kind of driving change in the Navy. Obviously, you've done some amazing work already around tree canopy cover, around installations, about incorporating sustainable design into new construction. What is it about finding alignment between the Navy's core mission and climate change? Is it about getting people excited about leading on climate change? What's allowed you to have success in that kind of implementation?
We start with this foundational concept of readiness in the military. And so that means that whether we're talking about the Navy, the Marine Corps, frankly, anybody who works for the department is going to be able to do what the nation calls on them to do. This includes partners and allies when required to do so. And so when we look at this in a broader scope, you think, what are the threats? What are the things that hinder the ability to be ready? Climate is a transboundary threat. This is in our national security strategy. This is true no matter what direction you go in. As we think about it from a civilian side, this is health, safety, welfare. So we think a lot about not just the military, but the defense communities. And so we talk about climate readiness as mission readiness. This is also community resilience in its broadest. And so we've got a shared threat, shared response type of mentality. We drive that that forward because Carol mentioned an industrial revolution, and back to our national security strategy, the president has identified an energy revolution and really charged us to go after and make sure that we are secure. So nothing drives you forward like making sure that you've got what you need. And so we talk about energy security being critical to mission success. If you cannot flip on the lights, if you cannot find the data, if you have not cooled the data, if you have not done all of those things that are really essential, kind of the ground we walk on in terms of operations, there is no way that we get to the other end of the fight. And we want to practice diplomacy, deterrence, everything that comes as part of defense and before the actual actions of engaging in some sort of conflict. Our partners and our allies are looking towards us for this type of partnership, for this type of alliance. It is everything from interoperability to smart power. And so we are integrating that into the way that we are operating as well because of how closely tied it is to every single part of the way that the Navy and the Marine Corps operate. I'll note that Carol talked a lot about the carrots that are out there in terms of resources. This is a place where we are able to partner with those defense communities and make sure that we are integrating the opportunity, whether we're talking about the energy resilience, water security, which is critically important, or a lot of these other elements that are coming as we look at a climate change impact. It is an energy, water resilience opportunity. And so as we work with these communities, places like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, which go to people who are generating really big ideas in terms of technology development and other places where those best ideas come from. That is where a lot of those funds are targeted to get to those ideas, to drive forward and really make sure that we are sustaining and institutionalizing them, which makes it an investment in the way that we are operating forward. So while I'll note that a smaller part is actually dedicated to the way that the military is able to take advantage of some of those funds, it's the best places that partnerships come into play and actually enhance the entirety of the resilience of the community, which is what we're after at the end of the day if we want to have a responsible, sustainable investment that shifts and acknowledges a future that we would like to shape.
So it sounds like it's a lot about understanding climate change as a challenge and opportunity for the Navy and being ready to meet it and framing it in terms of being operationally ready, whether it's making sure you have clean water where you need it or making sure that you can produce energy, in a remote area. It's all about enhancing the capacities of the Navy. And that's really how you kind of think about and frame the issue.
Absolutely. It is an advantage. It is an enabler. It creates and strengthens partnerships. And I'll just note that because we have such a big footprint globally as we look at installations, operations everywhere else, these are test opportunities too. And so that is one of the greatest offerings that we can make into the ecosystem is that we can test things in environments. We can evaluate things like military specifications and make sure that there's something that is scoped kind of across the continuum of need. And so that is something that we have to do, and we encompass so much of what that need looks like that we can really help to set requirements and provide the experimentation that leads to some of those places that really will be enduring ways forward and technology that we use.
Yeah. And it sounds like, in other words, you're able to pilot and demonstrate leadership, maybe not just to the private sector in the US, but also to our allies around the world who look to what the US Navy does as kind of a paradigm.
Absolutely. I'll offer as the naval services, the Navy and the Marine Corps certainly are feeling the impacts of sea level rise, of coastal erosion. That is our operational environment. And so as we look at a lot of the island nations, coastal nations that are similarly facing these types of impacts, and often cases with those nations, existential crises that are very present. It is a place that not only can we contribute to help, but we're learning a lot too, from everyone from tribal and indigenous populations who have known the land and water forever, to more industrial and built up areas like where we have our public shipyards, where we are elevating our construction requirements, making sure that we are building to higher floodplains, using more resilient materials. But it is both a give and a take in terms of that lessons learned, lessons applied type of relationship.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, the sort of threat of climate, sea level rise is very immediate for you all, and not just for our own facilities, American facilities, but I imagine the Navy is going to be deploying to help people in situations where there are floods overseas. So it's very top of mind for you. Brandon, a similar question for you, but different kind of emphasis. One of the arguments made historically around sustainability in the kind of corporate context was that it would be kind of a win-win, that if you focus on sustainability, you'll uncover waste and cut costs, or you'll rethink an industrial process and come up with a new byproduct that you can sell, that it's sort of do good to do well. I'm curious, in your experience at Microsoft, have you uncovered new economic opportunities through the kind of work on climate and energy innovation, or is it a little bit more about Microsoft sort of, as a good citizen on the global stage, taking leadership on a critical issue?
Well, I think both of these are important. We know as a company that sells to every sector of the global economy that for Microsoft to do well, the world needs to be doing well. And so the broader global and societal well-being and economic well-being in the face of climate change is very important. However, there are also initiatives that we've seen that start as sustainability initiatives, but where we see a very strong business case that helps us in our growth trajectory, helps us in our overall positioning with customers and on a cost basis. A couple examples of that we've had some experience with. First would be the circular centers that we've built co-located with our data centers. This is where we take some of the electronic equipment and disassemble, reuse, recycle, repair, send back to the original manufacturer for a true circularity of that digital infrastructure. That's been a great example of one where both the business case and the sustainability impact are really highly aligned, both towards our zero waste goals as well as the overall cost and replacement cycle for that equipment on a global scale. And the second example I would share is we've done some work and built full-scale production data centers with flexible load. And so that's been a really interesting area in terms of how our digital infrastructure interacts with the grid. In Wyoming, in Dublin, we've done work with the grid operators to say, okay, how can our load be a net asset for the grid so that we're providing that resilience and providing that flexibility as load comes online. And I think that's become increasingly important as the overall dialogue on grid expansion has changed over time and evolved, especially in the United States, but really, in certain hotspots around the world. Another example would be our very sustainable data center that we've built in Sweden. That's another example where building something that's really at the cutting edge of climate innovation has also enhanced the overall business case for our growth. So we definitely see the two going hand in hand. And I think there's a second wave behind those examples I gave of technologies that still have a green premium today. So they may be more expensive today than an incumbent technology, but which are coming down the cost curve. And once they hit cost parity, then you'll see broader adoption that's also economic in addition to being sustainable.
Yeah. Just on that final point, I'm sort of curious. I mean, is there a little bit of push and pull internally? I mean, Microsoft's obviously very committed as a company, but each business unit is also conscious of their costs, and any change requires time and energy. Is there a little bit of hey, you really should try this new technology, give it a whirl, trying to mobilize people internally to take a little bit of risk on these new innovative technologies?
Yeah, I mean, it's a balance, right? Microsoft has shown itself willing to take big bets, and we have a sort of critical infrastructure obligation to our customers as well. And so we have to balance those two things. And I've definitely seen us taking on new technology adoption, and it has to go through a rigorous sort of technical qualification process and also cost evaluation process. I think to your point about the shift from, we call it from pledges to progress, the shift from goal setting to implementation. I think what's important to remember is the time horizons for these things. We're collectively at the societal scale in an important investment period here. And the fruits of those investments, we won't see those immediately. It will take some time. And so a lot of the new technology investment, both capital investment and then also operational efforts that we're investing in this new technology adoption, we'll really see the fruits of those in a few years from now. And that's why it's so important to be able to be an early mover in this space. And one of our public-private partnerships, First Movers Coalition, we joined to say, yes, we will be an early buyer, and we understand that early purchasing is part of driving down a cost curve and driving up scale so that then you can start to see the tangible progress down the line. But there is this interim period that's very much an investment and building period.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, one of the reasons I was excited for this conversation is that Microsoft and the Navy are two institutions that are capable of taking that long-term view. And not every organization either is willing or, sort of has the resources and time horizon to think on the sort of decades-long scale. Just a note for folks in the audience, if you want to ask a question, you can use the Q&A function. A couple people have raised their hands, but I can't call on you. So just type in the questions and we'll get to them towards the end. Carol, I want to pivot now to talk a little bit about sort of what's happening in markets as a result of these commitments. But first, you mentioned this sort of shift in the approach to policy in the Biden administration around carrots and incentives. Do you see the sort of public and private actions as sort of substitute or complementary goods? By which I mean, do you think that corporate actions can be a substitute for additional future federal policy, or are we going to need additional, steps at the federal level, whether it's incentives or regulation or, even a tax on carbon or something like that?
So, I think we're at a crisis point and it's all hands on deck. And so I am reluctant to take almost any solution off the table. I think that the incentives and the carrots, as we're talking about them, are very interesting. We're going to learn a lot about how far can you get with those. I think you will still need regulations. They set the floor, right? And you've got to keep lifting that floor up if we're going to make the kind of progress. And we continue to need the private sector to step up and go further. And do more and do what Microsoft is doing. We need the federal government to do what the Navy is doing. I mean, it's really all of these pieces. And I in my mind, what we're headed towards, obviously, is addressing the climate crisis. But we're really in the near term headed toward: is there an inflection point? Is there a point where we can really see all of this working and see it as the way we think about the economy, the way we think about challenges as a company, as a country, as a world? And I think there are some sectors where it's never a neat line from here to the inflection point, but you can kind of see. I mean, I feel like we're getting there with electric vehicles. We know how to build them. We know how to recycle the batteries. We still have a charging infrastructure need, but we know what all the pieces are, right? And so we need to put them together in a manageable way and get over this hump of sort of consumer concern about charging. And we can see it in some of the other sectors. Brandon mentioned the grid. When I worked for President Obama, he had this saying: if Thomas Edison came back, he would recognize the grid because nothing has changed. And he wasn't far from. He was pretty right. That is one where it's, for me at least, and Brandon, you may have a better sense of this, it's hard to see there's so many pieces involved, and it's such a complicated system. We I think know some of the pieces, but figuring out sort of what are all the pieces and how they then weave together. One issue that we haven't mentioned that I think is worth putting on in the conversation is as we engage in this energy transition, this massive energy transition, that it has to be just and equitable. And for far too long, communities were left behind. Communities bore the brunt of our industrial revolution, our first industrial revolution. They continue to bear the brunt of that, suffering disproportionately exposures. And so, as we think about what we're doing today, we really do need to think about these communities. The administration announced a few weeks ago, EPA actually announced, my former agency, they awarded $14 billion to 3 entities to really set up sort of what are called green banks. And a lot of that work will be focused in low-income communities, and to both create the jobs, but also multifamily solar, charging infrastructure, et cetera. And so I think, at every turn, we have to constantly remind ourselves or ask ourselves the question, is this just and equitable?
Yeah, and on that, I mean, I noticed, Brendan, Microsoft's commitments very explicitly. This is one of the kind of core pillars of it, is thinking about the kind of equity aspects of the clean energy transition.
That's right. Yeah, when we launched the fund strategy, as well as our overall sustainability commitments for the decade, climate equity is one of the key pillars in terms of the type of impact and the type of markets we're trying to build. And in our investment activities in the Climate Innovation Fund, we evaluate and score every single investment opportunity in terms of climate equity potential. And there's a few different forms that we look for in terms of the types of communities that are being supported, and then the types of investments that are most suitable for helping those communities. But I think it's really important to look for that, and also for it to not be sort of separated out, but integrated into the decision process. And that's really what we've tried to do.
I want to talk for a minute about how markets are moving now. A lot of our kind of audience and our folks in the venture and technology community who are thinking about where to invest and maybe where to start a new company. And so, Meredith, I'm curious to hear from you. As you look out again with that decades-long view on what the Navy needs to achieve, is it more about kind of steady execution with the existing technologies that we have in place, or is it more about the need for some real breakthroughs? And if the latter, and you mentioned, that the Navy was kind of thinking about this, what are some of the kind of areas you're thinking around R&D, and maybe what are some opportunities for the private sector innovation that would make a big difference for the Navy?
Sure. So we are operating with speed and impact. So certainly how we're driving. And if you don't mind my spending just 1 minute on the other point, because I think I have some surprise perspective from the Department of Navy that maybe wouldn't be immediately apparent. And I think it segues into your question here. So the environmental justice, the equity factor is something that we have a lot of opportunity to play in as well. And I'll give 2 quick examples, one Navy, one Marine Corps, and it also shows how we're driving forward in markets. So first on the Navy side, we participate in a state program in California called the Low Carbon Fuel Standard. What this does, and I'm very proud, we're actually the first federal entity to be able to participate in it, but we're able to participate in the carbon market. We get credit for making sure that we're not putting these emissions out, and then we are able to, for the surrounding community, lower noise levels, make sure that the air is cleaner. We sell the credits on the market, and then through a federal authority are able to reinvest the benefits of those credits into clean energy infrastructure. So talk about the wilds of layering authorities, opportunities, and making sure that you help a community. This was a state, federal authority, and around our shipyards are often places that can really benefit from this layering of authorities to make sure that we are considering those environmental justice considerations. going forward, that is a place where energy port technology that is both secure, efficient, and going to build towards that energy revolution that we are in right now and the future that we want to sustain, that is a place to play. Those markets are a place that we are finding that we can go with impact. On the East Coast, Marine Corps base Albany, it's a logistics base, significant for the way that we operate. It is our first net zero energy base in the Department of Defense. So I'm also very proud of the Marine Corps for being able to do that, but significant because it took a while to get there. And so it is going through that commitment, setting that North Star, but it was a critical partnership with our energy partners, the community, making sure that we had the skill set both established, developed, and sustained so that we could do things like have microgrids, be able to island, give energy back to the community, make sure that we are using a diversity of energy generation and also storage to make it available. And so all of those component parts as well are places that we are looking to continue to advance. I will emphasize security is an aspect that is critically important to the way that we operate, because we are looking to be energy secure. So whether it is a man-made or natural disruption, that we can keep on operating, because people will turn to the Navy and the Marine Corps first to be able to be that responder. As we look at more of the innovation going forward, we are continuing with the security theme, looking for secure battery solutions. So the Department of Energy has done tremendous work to make sure that we are starting to generate that domestic supply. We need alternatives to some of those rare earth minerals. We need environmentally sound ways to recycle and reuse, and we need to make sure that we are maximizing the capacity so that we don't see the hesitancy of the reliability of the grid. Carol, I think that there would be a lot of comfort in the infrastructure on our bases, but it is that security that is important as we innovate to make sure that we are protecting the work that the military is doing as we advance in a space that is sustainable in all of the definitions of the word. I'll offer another thing is going fast. So as we look at things like 3D construction that is going to meet everything from seismic, sustainability, and hurricane standards, we need to be able to forward deploy fast and build where we are. So as we can be lighter, faster, more resilient, and more sustainable, that is another component piece that is very important, so that energy, both stored and operational, and then also how we are thinking about our footprint in a sustainable way, are two places that I am very interested. But as I said, we're a test bed, so we through third-party financing, I should mention, have a lot of opportunity to be able to partner and innovate together.
I'm just imagining the bureaucratic hurdles participating in California's carbon market. That's a non-trivial accomplishment. So, awesome.
Yeah, California is great when you figure out how to align all the Swiss cheese holes. So
yeah, that's no undertaking. And I think it's inspiring to hear about the Marine Corps base going net zero. I mean, if the Marine Corps can do it, then no one else has a good excuse. They have as much stress as any institution and as much needs for readiness, and as you laid out. So that is a great kind of pilot and an example for the market. Brandon, I want to come back to you. I mean, you've been at Microsoft for 7 or 8 years, from well before the Inflation Reduction Act, and you must see a lot of the market now around innovative technology. Who wouldn't want to have Microsoft on their cap table as an investor? How have you seen, or have you seen markets shift since the Inflation Reduction Act? Is there a greater deployment of capital? Is there a faster pace of innovation, or has it been really kind of steady state for the last 7 years in a good or maybe not so good way?
So I think it's changed enormously in that time period. And I would say in my work with our energy team in the cloud operations and innovation group, one of the things we used to see 7, 8 years ago is that we would pilot a promising new technology, But then if we were excited about it and ready to move to commercial scale up, the company didn't necessarily have the resources to scale up and deliver on that type of opportunity. And so that was really about sort of how nascent the capital markets were in this space at that time period. And then also just the overall sort of narrower set of technologies that were in the market and available. Since that time, two things have happened. One, first, partly driven by the recognition of the science and the sort of exogenous facts that we know from science and economics that we need to make this transition. We need to make it faster and we need to make it at scale. Partly in response to that, and then also in response to the commercial opportunity that's emerging. We've seen capital flows into this space that have nearly tripled over a 4-year period overall. This is not just early stage private markets, but also public market capital and infrastructure capital. And that's wonderful. That's an important inflow of capital into this space, but it is still far short of what we know the economics and the science tells us we need to make the net zero transition by 2050 as a society. So I think that what we've seen is significant acceleration in this space from starting with the private sector and the capital markets. We've seen passage of the IRA, which has supercharged that, and really, the positive effects can't be overstated. It provides much needed certainty, much needed support from a market perspective for pulling these solutions forward at scale. And, as John Doerr says, what we really need right now is both speed and scale. And so what I see on the IRA side and how it's touched, our work, I see that solutions that might have struggled with some of their capital formation or, making the leap across the so-called valley of death into infrastructure scale up of, their second or third of a kind facility are really able to fill those positions. Both through public capital partnership with DOE and other programs, as well as the security and the comfort that then provides the private sector to come in as well. One example is, we helped finance the LanzaJet Freedom Pines fuels plant in Soperton, Georgia, and the DOE participated as well, and a number of airlines participated as well. And getting those different types of capital to all come together and bring this, large scale production facility online, that's what you need to see a drop in replacement that goes from being in product development to on the market producing and able to be consumed and used by airlines, around the world today. So I think that's one example. And yesterday we just announced that we've invested in that technology, that LanzaJet technology. So I think that's an example of the positive flywheel effect that public policy and public capital can play in the space. And I think it's been really important, and we need to continue to see those type of partnerships take place.
Yeah, it's funny. Carol sees it when she goes to COP. You see it on not quite the ground, but you're seeing the kind of different capital stack.
No, it's absolutely the same players, that you're talking about. And a lot of this is a question of what does it take to get the overall technology and contracting and basically the package ready so that mainstream capital, the banks, the financiers that Carol's mentioning, so that they can take the baton. And it requires this combination of public sector and private sector support through that interim period to get there. And that's what we're seeing. We recognized that in addition to the financial investments we make out of our Climate Innovation Fund, that there's still a gap at that specific stage of sort of early commercial infrastructure. And so we also are a donor to Breakthrough Energy's Catalyst program that really looks to bring some of those multiple sources of capital together.
What is the sort of one challenge or one thing that you would like to see over the next couple of years that will overall accelerate the clean energy transition or address some of the kind of immediate problems you see? And Carol, I'm going to start with you.
Well, sadly, I would say politics. We live in a democracy. We need people to participate in the democratic process. We need people to become educated voters and vote the issues that are important to them. I would say that's in some ways the most important step.
Brandon?
I would say, we have learned so much from the renewable energy industry and how that industry has been driving down costs, driving up maturity of market mechanisms. And I would like to see, we're seeing that applied to sustainable fuels. And I think seeing it applied to embodied carbon materials would be the big thing. That would be a huge breakthrough in deep decarbonization.
Meredith, take us home.
All right. So I'll offer the biggest place that we see an impact is in our operational energy and recognize that that is a game changer. But if I could take what both Brandon and Carol said and combine, I think that security, safety, and sustainability are apolitical and quite necessary in terms of the entirety of the ecosystem that we are operating in. And so for us, when we talk about security, that mission assurance, this is not about green or not green or pick your side of politics. It is about making sure that we are successful at the task at hand. The same for safety. As you talk about a community, if you talk about a corporation, you talk about anything, you want people to be able to operate in a way that is supported for what you need them to do. So that is their electricity, that is their water, that is everything else. And sustainability is about guaranteeing that we have made an investment that is going to bring forth the resources and the things that we depend on in the place that we are, if not better. Sustainability in terms of a military approach is that you look out for the sailor next to you, the Marine next to you, and the one that's going to come ahead of you as you rotate out, retire out, whatever it is. We do that in the federal government too for civilians. You got to look out for your future self, no matter what that future looks like. And if we are collectively looking across these three elements together, then I think we wash away a lot of the stuff that might confuse us and let us get to work.
Very well said. Carol, Brandon, Meredith, thank you so much. I feel energized and inspired by the work you are doing. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for all of that. And thanks to everyone who tuned in.
Thanks, Nate. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.